heart of where innovation, money, and power collide in Silicon Valley and beyond. This is Bloomberg Technology with Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow.
We are live from New York and San Francisco. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, OpenAI gets closer to a new AI model that reasons and a new mega valuation of $150 billion.
And Intel at a crossroads, the chipmaker reaching a pivotal moment with a decade of dominance at risk.
And the first commercial spacewalk. Polaris Dawn hits mission goal 700 kilometers above the Earth. But first, let's just check in on these markets, because we are rallying once again. 4 straight days of gains on the NASDAQ 100. I'm looking at Ed, 4.5% higher. We add $1 trillion in large part because of some single names like NVIDIA. But NVIDIA is also linked to the world of artificial intelligence and exactly where we want to dig in on.
Yeah, let's get to our top story. OpenAI is in talks to raise $6.5 billion from investors, catapulting the AI startup to a $150 billion valuation. This is the company gets ready to release its latest AI model, codenamed Strawberry. For more, Bloomberg's Rachel Metz joins us. And Rachel, you and I are working with Gillian Tan, Mark Bergen on reporting this primary round. And long story short, $150 billion is a very big number in terms of valuation. What do we know about OpenAI's latest fundraise?
Well, we know that they are trying to raise quite a bit of money, and they're also trying to raise an amount in the form of debt. And then, as you and I and some of our colleagues reported, that they are hoping to do this at quite a high valuation. This would be $150 billion, would be much higher than the amount that we've previously reported, which was under $100 billion. And I mean, I think what we have to think about when we think about this company trying to raise a lot of money is that what they're doing is extremely expensive. I mean, they are building enormous AI systems and they're running enormous AI systems, and that costs a lot of money.
Let's just talk about where the money is being spent. The latest model, Strawberry. This is where training of these models, the compute, the talent, but what's the outcome?
So Strawberry is a model that's been in the works for a while, and essentially what they are hoping that it can do is some tasks that are similar to how humans would conduct reasoning. It's going to be aimed at things like more complicated math and coding questions and prompts than have been possible in the past. A source that I spoke to that has tried it out said it was able to solve a problem that's been kind of popular on social media lately. Is 9.11 larger than 9.9, which is the kind of thing that a human might find simple but can vex computers.
The other thing we reported, Rachel, our sources telling us that OpenAI has gone to the banks and is looking at doing about $5 billion of debt in the form of a revolving credit line. It's not sort of unusual, but it makes me think that OpenAI is kind of getting to company scale. We keep calling it a startup, but do we actually have any sense of like how much money all of this technology is bringing in for them? How much of a business they have beyond just constant R&D and new model innovation?
Yeah, they actually have been able to scale their business quite a bit over the past year. They've released several different enterprise products. And we actually know from our recent reporting that they reached a milestone in terms of how many people are using their enterprise versions of ChatGPT. This would be individual users, not customers. So if they're able to keep growing and growing on that side, then they're bringing in lots of money. So the money that they're raising, perhaps there'd be a little less pressure on that.
Bloomberg's Rachel Metz, brilliant reporting, deep reporting, and something that a lot of people are talking about online as well. Thank you very much. Now, this week is a pivotal one for Intel. Intel's board has been weighing how to move forward after its latest earnings report and plans to slash 15,000 jobs, which leaves Intel with a few options, including scaling back some of its multi-billion-dollar factory projects, selling off subsidiaries, or splitting Intel's core operations into separate units or companies. Bloomberg's Ian King penned this big take, and actually you kind of get it all in the first paragraph. It's slow motion disaster. Where are they in the slow motion action that's happening?
I mean, it's been tough for a while, right? They've been trying to do two fundamentally competing things, which is to spend a lot of money on restoring this company to where it was at a time when business has turned against them and away from them.
And Ian, just jumping in here, what's so interesting is what's on the exact agenda over these 3 days, which culminates today. Pat Gelsinger, in any trouble here?
Yeah, I mean, not according to our reporting. As you saw in the story, one of the sources that we spoke to said that that's not the kind of board meeting that we're up to at this particular point. What we're up to is looking at what Intel does, because it's a huge company, 100,000 people, what it does, where it's focusing, where it's spending, to look at perhaps discontinuing some of the things that are a little bit peripheral, to save some money, to focus on trying to push that plan, and that's Pat Gelsinger's plan forward at this point. That's kind of where we are.
As best you can, then, take us inside the room of the board meeting and kind of all the options available to them, what are they considering right now?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing on the agenda, as far as we understand it, is this factory network. You remember we've done all of these stories and spoken about big plants in Ohio, big plant in Magdeburg in Germany, obviously an extension of what they already have in Arizona, and smaller projects around the world. That is a lot of money being poured into the ground in anticipation of business growing significantly. What we learned from earnings was that business is not growing to match that footprint, whether it's a footprint physically or whether it's a head count. So clearly the focus is on right-sizing the company around what they've got coming in terms of orders and money.
And Ian, what you do so well in this story is the context, isn't it? That this isn't an overnight issue. This has been a long time coming.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I mean, the focus, the traditional Wall Street playbook would be, oh, look at the management. Do we need a new management? Do we need to... All of those kind of standard playbook things don't really apply here, at least not yet. I mean, Pat Gelsinger, remember, was brought in to fix the problems that already existed. He gave a prescription that everybody signed off on and agreed with. The problem that we have is that prescription is proving more painful than perhaps we had expected, and clearly the market does not like that.
We're just looking at the revenue growth that the market does not like. Ian King, we so appreciate it. Thank you. Let's just talk about what the market's also having to digest, with Microsoft saying it's going to be cutting 650 jobs in its Xbox unit. The third such layoffs this year, as the company is just trying to rein in costs and integrate that massive $69 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard. The roles to be eliminated are in, quote, mostly corporate and supporting functions, according to a memo sent to staff by Xbox chief Phil Spencer today. Ed, what have we got coming up?
Yeah, some breaking news on the Bloomberg terminal. Apple has got FDA authorization for its AirPods to act as hearing aids in a hearing aid feature. We were tracking this one because they said just on Monday during the presentation that they were going to get it, and they did. And you look at some of the other hearing aid stocks, they're not moving right now. They were when that news first came out. Apple flat in what's been an interesting week. But we've got a lot coming up on the show too.
Yeah.
We've got to talk about what's happening up in the sky carrier. Historic day for SpaceX and Polaris Dawn. I'm very much looking forward to this one. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg Technology. Some quick calls. Micron under pressure this morning. The stock touching its lowest level in nearly 7 months as some analyst reactions. BNP with a double downgrade, cutting shares to underperform from outperform with a street low price target. The analyst warning of a correction in DRAM prices due to some oversupply risk. Karen.
Now, some breaking news from Bloomberg that General Motors is in discussions to buy EV batteries that would use technology from China's CATL and be assembled at a new plant slated actually to be built here in the United States. It's all according to sources. Gabby Coppola is here to break it down. And, well, this is a political handball, it feels like.
Yes, it is very sensitive. We've got U.S. and China. The U.S. is trying really hard to decouple from China, and Chinese companies are trying really hard to access the US market. And the automakers, the American automakers are caught in the middle because, GM, Ford, Stellantis, they've all poured billions of dollars into making batteries and forming joint ventures with the Korean battery makers and, gotten a lot of subsidies from the US government in order to do so. But because EVs are not selling well, because they've had struggles making batteries, which is normal. Making batteries and EVs for the first time in your 100-year history, it's not going to go smoothly right off the bat. It never does. Didn't for Tesla, doesn't for anybody. So they're under pressure. And so this potential deal, which is still tentative, it's just talks, nothing is finalized, would be a way for American car companies to get access to cheap, really cutting edge battery technology from China without tripping up all the political wires that could, potentially trip up when you work with a Chinese company.
Right. Well, I think the basics of what we heard from sources is really important. The mechanics are such that the battery technology is licensed from CATL, a Chinese company, but the operations are run by a conglomerate from Japan called TDK, which many of the people on this show probably haven't heard of, but they're basically a consumer electronics company. And then GM and other automakers, I think is what we're hearing, right, Gabby, would buy the batteries on fixed term contracts. So they're kind of insulated from price swings. Take it from there. What else do we know?
Well, I think one of the most interesting things about this is that you've got a Japanese company acting as a middleman. Up until now, we've seen Ford and Tesla do these kind of cute kind of licensing deals where they can use CATL technology without, violating any rules or tripping any political wires. Now, this is a new development in how the auto industry is adapting to the political environment and the EV environment and the fact that they're, not profitable on making EVs yet. So we know that, GM and CATL and Japan's TDK, which makes they're a supplier for the iPhone. They, make batteries for consumer electronics. They want to get into the EV battery business, and this could be a way into it. So they're looking at states in the southern U.S., and I think that, obviously this is so sensitive politically that I think the results of the presidential election in November could potentially, affect the outcome of these talks.
That's what sources told us. Bloomberg's Gabby Coppola, great reporting, really interesting report it alongside you. Thank you. Okay, it was a historic day for SpaceX. The company's Polaris Dawn crew successfully completed the first commercial spacewalk. Tech billionaire Jared Isaacman was the first of the crew to step foot outside. Here's what he experienced.
Back at home, we all have a lot of work to do, but from here, Earth sure looks like a perfect world.
For more, Ezine Uzuokoro of the Harvard Belfer Center joins us. She was formerly Assistant Director for Space Policy at the White House, where she led advancements in space launch capabilities, as well as a former NASA executive with over 60 space mission contributions. And let's start with your reaction to what happened in just a few hours ago.
This is a huge success, and it's monumental, not just for astronauts, but for anybody with a dream, for SpaceX to test the market viability of space tourism, for us to determine if space tourism can really grow quite like the early days of aviation. So this is fantastic.
The images on the screen that you're seeing are from Jared Isaacman's helmet camera from the custom spacesuit. And now what you're seeing is the nose cone camera from atop the Dragon capsule. But this is the question so many people asked me this morning. Was it actually a spacewalk?
Yes, technically it was, because they were outside their capsule, their spacecraft, and they have a railing that they were holding on to, and they were outside their capsule for 10 minutes each, both Jared and Sarah, the other astronaut. And this is risky. You think of the spacesuit as a spacecraft in itself because it monitors their temperature and controls their vitals while they are outside. And what we see is is how successful this was after a mere few years of training versus the decade that one trains for when you're a professional astronaut.
Phenomenal when it comes to commercial space success, Esne. What will we learn when they come back and they're tested? Because this is about radiation exposure as well. How tough could this have been on their bodies?
Absolutely tough. You can be hot one moment, you could be cold another moment, your fingers could hurt. So even though it's cold in space, there could be pressures within the suit that make you feel very warm. So this was a complete, thorough test of the spacesuit, which SpaceX intends to use for future moon missions, for future Mars missions. And so there will be a lot of lessons learned in those regards. But I think if you think of the trillion-dollar space economy that has been discussed for decades now, this is really an exciting point to see if there is viability in that market, to see how much growth the sector will endure due to their success today.
Sarah Gillis was out there as well, and I think it was her who was saying this is really integral for data to take back to SpaceX. But they don't really know yet what they'll be doing with it. At the moment, it just feels like SpaceX is cleaning up when it comes to space success. Is it?
They are doing remarkably well. It's obviously due to their vision, their hard work, and this success is just so impressive because spacewalks are risky, and you have astronauts that are not professional astronauts, and the company has been planning this mission for years and not decades, and they pulled it off successfully. So it's very critical to realize the feat that was accomplished today. It's incredibly impressive.
Thanks for giving the context it deserves. Esne Uzo-Okoro, great to have you with us, Harvard Belfer Center Senior Fellow and former NASA executive. Now coming up, Sarah Levy is going to be joining us to talk about AI's role in her advisory firm and how we're all using it to manage our money, Ed.
I'm going to take a quick look at Microsoft, and it's kind of more of a PSA. Both Azure and 365 had access and connectivity issues this morning. Microsoft's updated us and said that when it comes to Azure, particularly connectivity through AT&T, they've mitigated whatever the issue was, and then access to 365 is showing signs of recovery. The stock down 0.5 percentage point. I don't think we draw a causal link necessarily, but with the outage at the same time of the CrowdStrike issue a few weeks ago, there's a lot of focus when these things happen, partly because cloud is so important for so many people. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg Technology.
Out to the world of tech investing more broadly, Betterment, which bills itself as the largest independent digital financial advisor, just come out with a first of its kind survey showing 4 in 5 advisors are using AI in their work. Let's discuss how artificial intelligence is managing your money. Betterment CEO Sarah Levy is here with us. Sarah, what made you run these sorts of numbers? I know that you're looking at this particular part of the business, you're rebranding it, but you just wanted to understand how these advisors are getting to grips with AI.
So the key for us is that the advisor we serve tends to be more of a millennial advisor, and this is a growing group, and they're much more technically sophisticated than their predecessors, and so they don't sort of suffer fools lightly when you think about the technology choices, the user interface, the power, right? We really need to provide them with powerful tools, and so Betterment Advisor Solutions is our advisor arm, and our roots were originally with the retail investor, where we learned a lot. But what we've learned for advisors is they can harness the power of technology just so much more. And AI, for me, is really a continuation on that spectrum, right? We introduced automation to save time, to save money, to help with customer retention, and AI just furthers that journey, really.
What are they using? Are they using generative AI per se, and how are they saving themselves time? How are they more productive?
So I think of AI a lot like digital. If you think back, call it 2 decades ago, when we talked about digital, and you said you have digital companies and you have analog companies, right? And at the time, people would ask, are you going to work in digital? And then digital became sort of part of the fabric of everything we do. That's how we think about AI, which is it's really just powering the humans to do better, stronger, faster, right? So everything from para-planning, right? Before you meet with a client as an advisor, and then after you meet with that client, there's a lot of work to do. AI can just take a lot of that administrative burden off the plate. That's just one great example.
Sarah, the better question posed by the Betterment survey is whether those 4 out of 5 financial advisors who are using AI, because loads of people watching this program will have a financial advisor, whether AI actually makes them better in managing people's money. Is there any evidence of that?
Well, I think I wouldn't think about AI as actually managing people's money. Remember, as a financial planner, we are fiduciary, right? Our advisors are fiduciaries. We as an RIA are fiduciaries. So I think the way you want to think about AI is basically giving back time and saving money for the advisor so that the advisor can focus on the client and on the investment solutions. And that's really the benefit that they're getting. AI, the computers are not taking over the world, right? The human advice is still a critical component of getting people to great outcomes and great plans.
An extension of that is whether it then becomes the economics kind of change, right? And fees and the incentive of somebody using a service or a digital format such as yours.
Well, I think, look, in the early days of where we began, our roots were robo-advisory, right? And there was a lot of sort of dismay in the advisor community, right? Is technology going to take over the human interaction? And I just think that was very overblown. And I would say the same about AI, which is not to diminish its potential. I think it is going to be a huge sort of power tool enhancer, if you will. But we've been building power tools for both advisors and retail investors for the better part of a decade and a half. And this just takes that really to the next level. That's the way we're thinking about it.
Okay, so cool. Classic 60-40 portfolio. It's just that the financial advisor will have more time being freed up by AI. Betterment CEO Sarah Levy, really appreciate you being here on Bloomberg Technology. Now, coming up, we're going to be joined by the CFO of Mercado Libre for an outlook on the fintech space in Latin America and all things going on in world of commerce. That's next. This is Bloomberg Technology.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde in New York.
And I'm Ed Ludlow in San Francisco.
Quick check on these markets, Ed, because actually we have had now 4 straight days of gains on the NASDAQ and the NASDAQ 100. We're on a roll. We've actually added $1 trillion in terms of market capitalization over those 4 days, despite those headwinds of perhaps that CPI coming in a little hot on the core basis. 2-year yields actually just pushing up a little bit. So maybe we're still anticipating what the Fed will do. Will they be able to cut as much has been anticipated? Many now seeing just a 25 basis point cut coming for September. I'm looking at Bitcoin just up 0.25%. So a little bit of risk on there as well. Move on and have a look at the individual movers. Look, a lot of the push forward in the NASDAQ is thanks to NVIDIA and some of the chip names. I think Broadcom is one of the biggest names for points contributing today. Warner Brothers Discovery doing well, up almost 2%. Charter Communications, yes, they will still have that distribution deal. Both stocks are rising. We're looking at MasterCard off by 0.6%, but big deal, more than $2 billion being spent in cybersecurity for this particular company. So they're doing a deal, they're focusing on your data, but of course when they splash the cash, maybe the shares come under pressure a little bit. Moderna, though, your key underperformer. I'm talking tech, but biotech here. And really a lack of clarity coming in future revenue from this business that doesn't seem to be amazing analysts. They feel that there's a lack of clarity in general on this business, but we are seeing revenue and the revenue guide being pulled down. Ed, what do you got?
An opportunity to get clarity on another business. As the Goldman Sachs Tech Conference comes to a close in San Francisco, we're thinking about how fintech is revolutionizing the financial sector, But we're also joined by one of the main players in global e-commerce, Mercado Libre. Its CFO, Martín de los Santos, joins us now. Welcome to Bloomberg in San Francisco. I think about your business in this way, that e-commerce, but 50% of it is now essentially fintech. You've met with the bankers and your investors and the other members of the technology community in the last few days. What business outlook and update did you give them?
Thank you, Ed, for having me. It's a pleasure being here. We are celebrating the 25th anniversary of our company this quarter, and over the past 25 years, we have built the largest e-commerce platform and fintech platform in Latin America. We recently became the most valuable company in terms of market cap in LATAM. So we're very excited about the growth and the opportunities that we are facing and the change that we're making in our societies. On the commerce side of the business, last year we had more than 90 million buyers purchasing 1.5 billion products in our platform for more than $50 billion and growing very rapidly. This is one of the things that the investor community was very surprised about our Q2 results. We built a very large logistic infrastructure that enabled us to deliver 75% of the products within 2 days in Latin America. That would be something undreamed of in Latin America 10 years ago, before we built our logistic infrastructure.
Right.
On the fintech side of the business, we process payments for over $170 billion, serving 52 million active users in our fintech solution, Mercado Power platform. And we're serving mostly people who had been excluded from the financial system, individuals or SMBs who had never had access to credit or financial products. So we're doing a lot of financial inclusion in Latin America. So we're very excited about the past 25 years, but we have plenty of growth opportunities going forward for the next 25 years.
Martin, we're looking at your shares at a record high. What about competition? You've seen the fintech, the unbanked opportunity, but so have a lot of others. How are you, as you go for a banking license, thinking about others wanting in on the space?
Yes, Caroline, we see a tremendous opportunity on fintech, in particular because of the banks have done a really poor job in Latin America, including people in the system. If you look at Mexico, for instance, where we're very active, we are the largest fintech in Mexico in terms of number of users and our credit book, for instance. This is a country where 50% of the people doesn't have a banking account. Less than 20% of people have a credit card. So there's plenty of room for us to grow. And of course,
in Mexico, it's not just the bank account. I'm thinking about deposits and loans, other financial products. Are you having success in Mexico with those lines?
Our credit book is growing 51% year on year. We have a $1.5 billion book in Mexico, which is the largest for any fintech in the country. Our users on the fintech side of the business are growing at 37% year on year from a very large base. So Mexico is wide open, really. So there are players who are also going to that market, and we think there will be a lot of financial inclusion. There will be space for several other players. Unlike commerce, where winner takes most, in fintech there is room for several players to be very innovative and actually change the lives of people by including them financially.
Let's go back to the winner takes most in e-commerce. You've got some Chinese competition. In fact, Marcelo Claure himself is helping Shein, for example. How are you seeing the Chinese competition in e-commerce?
Yeah, we've seen we've operated for 25 years in the region with a lot of competition. Initially, there were platforms similar to Mercado Libre that we competed with. Then we competed, obviously, with all the local retailers. More recently with the Americans, Amazon and Walmart. And more recently, we have seen a lot of competition from the Chinese. So the way we face competition is we compete basing on our strength, which is the logistic infrastructure that we have in Latin America that enables us to provide a world-class service to our users, and then the fintech and the payments solutions that we have built. In a region where most people don't have a credit card, having our own payment solutions is a really big competitive advantage. In the case of Mexico, 25% of the payments that are done on our platform are done with our own payment methods, our own credits, our own credit cards, and so on.
Martin, I think before we run out of time, we should talk about Argentina. A lot of people are trying to make a conclusion of the economic policy of Milei. How do you view that market? What are you going to do in Argentina?
Yeah, Argentina is a market where we have a very solid position. We actually started the company back in the days in Argentina. We had a tough first quarter, but we're regained growth in the second quarter. So we see a lot of opportunities there. We are investing in Argentina. We opened our new fulfillment center there. After 5 years, we reinvested in Argentina, and we see a lot of good prospects for the country. So the good thing about our business is that we've seen it all in Latin America over the past 25 years, and the secular trend of people moving online, 15% of the retail is done online in Latin America compared to high 20s in the US, high 30s in China. So there's plenty of room to continue growing the e-commerce market, and we are the leading player in e-commerce, so we play a very important role in that transition. And on the fintech side, there's plenty of room to continue growing. So as we say with Mercado Libre, the best is yet to come. We have a very good prospects for the future.
Mercado Libre CFO Martín de los Santos, thank you so much. Caroline.
Let's get to some talking tech now. First up, China wants to keep its EV tech to itself. According to sources, Beijing has asked car makers to keep its EV export kits from foreign plants, meaning key parts of the vehicle would need to be produced domestically. Now, the move comes as more companies build out factories in other territories. Plus, two of China's most prominent AI chip designers are looking to an IPO. According to sources, Shanghai Enflame and rival Shanghai Biren are planning an IPO as soon as this year. The move comes as China looks to shore up its semiconductor industry to combat US-led sanctions and bans. Ed?
A little bit more to come in the show. We're going to be joined by Anduril founder Palmer Luckey for an exclusive interview on the company's latest set of autonomous defense vehicles. And Carol, we actually have even more breaking news coming up as well.
We do. A new COO over at Microsoft. Satya Nadella saying this is building on capabilities essential in AI and operational excellence. Carolina Dybeck-Happe is joining Microsoft as EVP and COO. It's a newly created role. She's going to be joining the senior leadership team, reporting to Satya. Still not moving the share price. This is Bloomberg Technology.
Fuse Energy has raised $32 million in a new funding round, valuing the nuclear fusion testing startup above $200 million. Right now, industry experts say producing commercially viable fusion will require another decade or two of work, giving Fuse plenty of runway for customers to test their new technology. Bloomberg's Lizette Chapman has the story. You and I know loads of people in the Valley who have been talking about fusion for a while, and this is like a sort of tangible startup and part of the process, but my goodness, it sounds like we're still a long way off it being mainstream.
The technology will take a decade or two at least to create commercially viable source of energy. Like you said, this company is looking to make money along the way by providing radiation as a service to not only the private startups that are looking to do this, as we've discussed, there's a lot of money and a lot of interest in commercializing this, but more importantly, to provide revenue and testing results immediately by providing radiation as a service to harden nuclear weapons testing, and then also use that data to build their own fusion generator.
Pulsed power machines is what they're building. Who wants to take the financial risk to back this? Who is interested in fostering? Who is in the round?
Right. So there are a number of investors. There's Buckley Ventures, Josh Buckley. There's Tamarack, as well as the Chainsmokers, the musical group. Their venture capital firm, along with former DoD and officials, and also someone from Lockheed Martin, the former chief executive of Asia. So they'll be looking to use this technology in incremental ways, looking to rent their machines to just blast different machines, like fighter pilots, et cetera, to see what the effects of a nuclear explosion would be on planes and other materials that the U.S. would need in a time of war.
Lizette Chapman, we appreciate it. And talking of time of war, Anduril has just unveiled the Barracuda family of autonomous air vehicles, revealing its offering, of course, to the Defense Department program aimed at mass-producing aerial vehicles more cheaply. Anduril founder Palmer Luckey joins us now. And the philosophy here, Palmer, is just making it ever more easy, fewer parts, and making it quicker to make.
Well, I think that having fewer parts, easier to make, that's downstream of the real goal, which is to make sure that the United States, our allies, and our partners around the world have the tools that we need to deter expansionist dictatorships like China. Right now, in a lot of war games, we are modeling the United States as running out of critical munitions, particularly missiles, in just a few days of conflict. Anduril, for years, has been working to build a family of systems that solves this. And we just announced that family of systems today. It's called Barracuda. It's made with half the parts in half the time, using 95% less tools than a lot of the existing missile systems on the market. It is a mass manufacturable product that is designed to be made at scale, many thousands of systems at a time, because that's what the United States need. That's what our allies need. It's what our partners need.
Talking of partners and allies, drone AI over in Ukraine at the moment. You're supplying drones, we understand, piloted by AI, but how much is it AI? How much is it the human? How much autonomy do they have about targets?
Well, in our case, it's all about AI. Our core product is called Lattice. Anduril Industries has been working on AI-powered weapons for about 7 years now, and the core software is Lattice, this brain that powers all of our different systems, including Barracuda, including Altius, including Ghost, which are in Ukraine and have been since the second week of the war. We've destroyed hundreds of millions of dollars in critical Russian hardware that can't really be destroyed by things that require a real-time link to a person, because the Russians are quite good at jamming communications links when it comes to things that are important to them. They don't have enough of these jammers to hit the entire battlefield, but that's why it's so important that we keep taking those things out and eventually, hopefully, leave them helpless to these types of systems.
Palmer, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg Technology. In the context of Ukraine, I'm kind of thinking about the existing work and then, what we're hearing from Ukraine at the moment, which is they kind of want to push deeper or strike deeper into Russia. Does Anduril have any technology where you would work with Ukraine on that goal or be a part of that process?
Absolutely, with the caveat that these decisions are not up to us. It's up to the United States government. They decide who we sell to, how we sell to them, and to a large extent what they do with these weapon systems. And I don't think that Anduril or any private defense company, any private company, period, should be in a position where we're de facto controlling the United States foreign policy position by saying, oh, we would help with this, we would help with that. I think that we need to put that decision with the people who are supposed to be making that decision, which are people who are accountable to the electorate. In other words, you should not trust me. You should not have to trust me. You should trust somebody that you can vote for and then vote accordingly.
We're showing images of the Barracuda system, and at the top of the program, you talked about allies. And so when I think about scalability, is that because you want to be in service of any specific allies beyond the US government? What is the sort of benefit of the scalability of the design?
Well, this gets into a little bit the philosophy of it, but I'll tell you how I think about things. I don't think the United States needs to be the world police. I think we need to be the world gun store. We need to be able to provide our allies and our partners around the world with the tools that they need to turn themselves into prickly porcupines that nobody wants to step on. And I think that sending American lives overseas, boots on the ground, is not going to be the future of how we support our friends around the world. I think it's going to be making sure that we can make things at a scale where they believe that our support for them is more than just words. We can actually send them the things that we say that we're willing to send them. I think Ukraine has really exposed this weakness in the United States foreign policy strategy, where we say we support all of these people, but they look and say, well, they can't even manufacture the basics like artillery shells or small missiles. How could I possibly count on these people to be able to cash these checks that they're writing? And I think that Barracuda is a response to that largely. It's something that was designed from the beginning for low-cost, high-rate manufacturability, and it's a flying operational system right now with multiple customers. I think that partners are going to be able to trust that Barracuda is something that we can actually make for them and deliver to them when they need it, not just now, but also if a conflict were to erupt.
And you're delivering by manufacturing ever more in the United States. And with money, talking about cash and checks, you've just recently got a whopping valuation of $14 billion by raising more money to build in the US the Arsenal One and other manufacturing units. Can you update us as to where they might be, these sprawling manufacturing areas?
We just closed a huge round with our investors. It was all of our previous investors coming in and a whole bunch of new strategic investors who want to help us build a lot of things, but in particular Arsenal One, which is a 5 million square foot factory that we're building that is going to create thousands of jobs and build vast numbers of AI-powered autonomous weapons systems. And it's not just Barracuda, it's actually the entire product suite of things that Anduril makes. It's all of our missiles, it's all of our drones, it's our submarines, it's a reconfigurable factory line that is able to share a lot of the equipment and tooling between these programs, which gets the costs down and it gets the rates up and the benefits flow on to our customers.
Palmer, is Anduril selling air defense systems to Israel?
Well, look, I think I can't comment on any specific deployments, especially about something as sensitive as that. But I'll tell you this, I have no problem with Israel. I have no problem selling things like that to Israel. But a better target for your question would be the United States government.
And I have to ask you, you mentioned China at the top of the conversation. Has Anduril a commercial relationship with Taiwan?
Oh, we have a very strong relationship with Taiwan. I've been there many times. In fact, I'm going there again soon. And I think that that strong relationship is actually one of the reasons that Anduril was recently sanctioned by the Chinese Communist Party. They announced that that they're going to seize all our Chinese assets and that we're prohibited from entering the country. Joke's on them. We don't have any Chinese assets. But it was in the wake of a recent deal that we did with Taiwan, getting them some systems that I think China, frankly, is really afraid of. They know that our systems are the real deal, and they know they can't jam them. They know they can't hack them, and that's because they're powered by AI.
Anduril founder Palmer Luckey, it's been a while. It's great to have you back here on Bloomberg Technology. Thank you very much. Now, coming up, Adobe earnings are after the bell. Earnings continues. We get the expectations next. The stock down 0.5%. This is Bloomberg Technology.
$7 million viewers tuned into the presidential debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. And that's only on TV, according to Nielsen data. It blew well past the 51 million who watched the Republican nominee take on President Joe Biden back in June. Trump said he is not inclined to have another debate with Harris, though he later added he hadn't completely ruled out another matchup. I streamed it, Ed, so goodness knows what the numbers really were.
Yeah. Believe it or not, earnings season is continuing. The next wave of generative AI services may depend whether tech companies can find enough detailed 3D renderings of tractor trailers and shampoo bottles. Adobe, NVIDIA, Autodesk, and several other startups are working on just that. This is something Bloomberg's Brody Ford reported, and he did it before Adobe's earnings after the bell tonight. Let's start with the report. I saw the image attached to the story. What are you going on about?
You know, look, you could go on the internet if you're so inclined and scrape a bunch of photos, a bunch of videos, a bunch of books. If you want to create a 3D model that can, generate a coffee cup or something like that, you need something that is not, you can't scrape it, right? And so we're seeing companies like Adobe going out, and note that they're not scraping otherwise, but we're seeing them go out and buy 3D data directly from creators. We're seeing Autodesk go to its companies for construction management and design saying, hey, you have these 3D renderings of bridges. What if you shared them with us so we can build this 3D model? I think the same way we've seen photo models get created, a year or two down the line, we're going to start seeing these 3D models come out more.
How much is Adobe able to monetize this new AI focus?
Well, that's the big question for tonight, right? Everybody wants to know whether Adobe is going to be able to really get money from all of their generative AI innovations, right? They've rolled out a lot throughout their products, through higher pricing tiers, some credit packs, but like many software companies, it is not totally clear whether they are actually making money from it yet.
We'll wait to see if that revenue can indeed hit the 10% increase level I expected. Brody Ford, we hope you'll join us tomorrow to break down those numbers. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Plenty on.
What an edition it was, from private companies to public companies, everything in between. Don't forget, recap on the podcast. You know where to find it, on the terminal, online on Apple, Spotify, and of course on iHeart. From New York City with Caroline, out here in San Francisco with me and a visiting Brody Ford, this is Bloomberg Technology.